What can feminism teach us in architecture? Throughout history, women have had to overcome obstacles for rights that were automatically granted to men. As so, in architecture, where women practices in the field are more skewed, the feminist movement in architecture pushes diverse and nuanced approaches in design, with an emphasis on community and the realities of home and work environments. Gender equality in traditionally male-dominated jobs has been increasing over time, but to this day, women are notably underrepresented in architecture. This ultimately gives way to the prominent question, how is this relevant to the entire field? Architecture must continue to incorporate the feminist perspective into the field in order to break down rigid traditions and expand by looking at the ways women create practice and diversify the individual experience. In what ways does architecture embody the present inequality? In Discrimination by Design, a feminist critique of a man-made environment, Leslie Keynes discusses the idea of an open office space as the model for spatial organization of offices starting from the 1950s. This idea introduces hierarchical differences between workers in the office, where the amount of spatial privacy was an index for measuring social status. Due to that idea for the office space, workers who held the lowest positions in office were stuck in highly disruptive environments, which destroyed their ability to concentrate and placed them under relentless surveillance for supervisors and co-workers. Keynes also claimed that even today, most often, those who still work under such conditions are women. This relationship is exaggerated in Frank Lloyd Wright's Larkin Company Administration Building, which depicts female workers in a line down the center of a room surrounded by male co-workers. Evidently, according to Keynes, this enforces the regimented, hierarchical, sexually segregated workforce.
Some have argued that the reason for architecture being a male-dominated profession has biological causes. This relies on the idea that occupational segregation stems from women and men having preferences for certain types of professions, despite growing up in equitable societies. This leads to the argument that there is no need for affirmative action towards equality, as for outside factors will allow this to happen, such as a rise in female political leaders. A study completed in 2014 examined the occupational sex segregation in both developed and undeveloped countries. Interestingly, there seems to be a long-lasting correlation between women preferring non-things related jobs. This independent of the increase of women in powerful positions worldwide. Another finding is that sexual segregation in fields tends to be stronger in economically developed and liberal countries, which questions the role of patriarchy and gender segregation in society as a cause for occupational segregation. This variation in representation seems to have declined very slowly, despite increased female participation in the workforce, suggesting that there is a female predisposition to choose people-oriented jobs such as medicine and psychology. However, the proportion of women in architecture has been rising over time as the field has become more equitable. Even numbers of women are entering the field but are encountering barriers through their training. The National Council of Architectural Registration Boards found that women currently represent 50% of applicants to the Architectural Experience Program, a necessary step to obtain licensure, but that only 40% of people who complete the program are women. And despite an even number of applicants, fewer women graduate from architecture programs. This makes it clear that women are equally likely to pursue architecture and that occupational segregation has other causes. The issue of inequality in the U.S. workforce was first tackled legally in 1972 with the Title IX clause of the Federal Education Amendments. This clause states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Prior to this, most American architecture schools refused to accept women. Today, nearly half of U.S. architecture school graduates are women, yet women make up less than a quarter of licensed architects in the field and 70% of partners or principals in architecture firms, according to the AIA. Furthermore, a man working as a design principal makes roughly $20,000 more annually than the average woman in the same position. The underrepresentation of women in the field not only indicates a lack of equity, but results in the absence of a feminist or gendered perspective in design. Laurie Brown, a professor at the Syracuse University of Architecture, has long been tackling this problem. Brown is an architect, a member of the AIA and the American Association of University Women. She is an advocate for women in the field and has made great contributions to equity programs at Syracuse and nationwide, and is the editor of the book Feminist Practices: Interdisciplinary Approaches to Women in Architecture.
As a teacher, Professor Brown noticed a lot of women dropping out of the program and how few female faculty members there were. Citing one of her students in an article published for Traces, additional female faculty would provide positive role models to women and help foster an environment of support and inclusion, leading to greater retention of women not only in school, but also once they enter the professional realm. Highlighting the disparities in race and gender in academia in 2011, only 20.56% of all faculty members in accredited architecture schools were women, and only 15.98% of these were tenured. Although our environment here at Syracuse may seem equitable, students are relatively sheltered from the professional world where women struggle with the pay gap, achieving positions of power, generalizations about their skills, with 22% of participants experiencing regular discrimination at work. So, why isn't architecture diversifying at the same rate as other fields? What is the root of this inequality problem? In our interview with her, Brown referenced pinch points, or the major obstacles through which the dropout rate of women could be tracked. In university, things such as studio culture, lack of exposure to histories and theories involving women, and hidden expectations can all play a role. Further on in a professional career, pinch points are hiring, caregiving, and the glass ceiling, or unacknowledged barriers. But to really understand the issue of diversity in architecture, one must address not only the demographics of the field, but the definition of architecture itself. "We are asking the wrong question," Brown said in an interview for Metropolis magazine. "It's not just about writing women into bibliographies, and not just about adding them to design teams. We need to ask, what are the different ways that women create practice? We've been kept out of this patriarchy, so we are inventing different ways of practicing. Feminist models challenge the status quo, challenge the way things get built." One excellent example of how women have changed the nature of architecture along these lines is described in the article From Detached House to Apartment, written by Özlem Erdoglu Erkaslan. Her research focused on Turkey in the 1920s, which was experiencing a major shift from the old ideals of the Ottoman monarchy to a more secular state structure. This led to women having more freedom in political and social spheres, which had a surprising effect on architecture. Before independence, single-family detached houses were standard, with private gardens surrounded by stone walls, isolating women from the outside world and tethering them to their families. However, following the Turkish independence, the family orbit loosened, and as women gained independence, the form of architecture changed in suit. 5-6-story apartment blocks were pulled up in the cities. These blocks emphasized the unveiling of oppressive rules by using large windows as well as the addition of several balconies to create shared outdoor spaces that are unbounded and publicly visible. At the same time, feminist architecture rose in European countries, celebrating the allowance of women to move freely through their homes and to be able to interact with the outside world. Architecture largely follows human development. The field of architecture has long ignored women. Even though female culture has immensely impacted history, the rise of women's independence in the 20th century reformed how residential homes were developed, creating the movement toward equality that is seen today. According to Erkaslan, architecture can change and will often change in accordance with radical approaches. The presence of women in architecture is missed throughout the field. Leslie Wiseman, an architect and writer, describes the skyscraper versus home binaries that serve as a gender shorthand. She argues that a feminist approach would push for a larger civic realm, public spaces, and transportation that supports the realities of our lives, not the cultural fantasies about them. Architecture must continue to expand and incorporate broader definitions for approaches to design with an invigorated focus on communal space, including the integration of women practices to define equal individual experience.